And today's gratuitous food shot is good old English fish and chips. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm still in my childhood home, feeling very cozy here. And since I mentioned the situation in my video about crime in Japan, I wanted to make a quickie update about the peculiar news surrounding Carlos Ghosn. In the past few days, Ghosn fled Japan, breaking the terms of his bail. He's shown up in Lebanon, the country he's from. He was born in Brazil, but to a Lebanese family, and moved to Beirut at the age of 6. His arrest and subsequent detention has been a big story in Japan over the past year or so, since his arrest on the 19th of November 2018. And I have noticed that coverage and commentary has been pretty divided on language and broadly nationalistic lines. Ghosn, who of course completely transformed the fortunes of the Nissan car company and took it from over $6 billion in net loss to 2.7 billion net profit in a single year, was arrested for financial misconduct. Allegations included tax evasion through underreported salary, using company funds for personal purchases, especially of property, and possibly even frivolous things like a lavish party at Versailles. And this is where things become complicated. Ghosn was arrested, and what usually happens in Japan when someone in such a senior position gets caught embezzling or the like is they make a tearful, questionably sincere apology, pay a hefty fine, and then generally resign and fade into obscurity. But Ghosn didn't play ball. He protested his innocence throughout. Fine, so he goes to trial like everyone else, right? Well, Japan's justice system is somewhat unique. They don't really prosecute people unless they're pretty certain they'll get the conviction, usually thanks to a confession. They can detain most people for 23 days without criminal charges being filed, which is, enough to ruin the lives of a lot of people in this world as it is. But in situations where they don't get their way, police can rearrest the suspect on new charges and then detain them further. Then they can indict him. With Ghosn, this gets coupled with him being considered a flight risk, which he was, and essentially he was imprisoned without even contact with his wife, more or less indefinitely without a conviction, until his trial. So here's where things become very divisive. The Japanese media was by and large very quick to condemn Ghosn, and most Japanese people I know that I've spoken to about this simply heard or personally interpreted matters to conclude that he was a crook. He was stealing money, and no matter what he'd done to reverse the fortunes of a big company, a thief is a thief. The concept of innocent until proven guilty holds less sway here. Not that it's unquestionably followed in the West or anything. As time went on, Renault also uncovered millions of euros worth of expenses they deemed questionable, and Ghosn did settle with the SEC in America for failing to disclose 9-figure sums in his income. So you may conclude it was likely some wrongdoing took place in Japan. Sure, but that's personal interpretation. It was never proven in a court of law. There was no confession, and Ghosn maintained that what he did was approved by Nissan, or the responsibility of those he delegated to look after his finances. I'm not a lawyer, certainly not a Japanese lawyer, so I'm not going to speculate on the legal matters, but at the very least Ghosn was clearly not prepared to fall on his sword, pay a fine, and be done with it. More interesting to me, and the reason I became interested in the subject at all, was the prevalent question of what the Japanese call hitojichi shiho, or hostage justice. As I said in my other video, a case that was reported on far less in the media, but was, if anything, much more sympathetic than following what happens to a corporate fat cat, was the case of US student Julian Adame, who came to Japan as a tourist, got drunk and passed out in a bar, then woke up to police telling him he'd broken a lamp and had to pay over $900 to replace it. He supposedly thought the police officers were fake, refused to hand over his passport, and at the station resisted arrest. He was in solitary confinement for 11 months. Reports aren't entirely clear on the matter of what he was actually charged with, and resisting arrest in a police station will get you punished anywhere in the world. but this happening concurrently with Ghosn's daisy chain of charges shone a light on a justice system that should leave anyone deeply troubled. If you're Japanese, if you're a tourist, if you're one of the richest men on the planet, if you're in Japan and just get on the wrong side of the justice system, even if hypothetically you're completely innocent, you can be imprisoned for a large chunk of your life without trial. And that's pretty scary. Obviously there will be some people who probably have the super fun hobby of going around the net calling people bootlickers and thinking ACAB is a secret code word, who will tell you police forces can do similar anywhere in the world. But Japan's setup, where they are empowered to hold a suspect more or less indefinitely, where they don't tend to bring you to trial without a very high probability of them getting their conviction, and a reliance on confession to facilitate that, inevitably leads to the question of false confessions. The whole system makes it seem like you're guilty by default, punished as though guilty, and will be trapped in a kind of legal purgatory until you confess, guilty or not. And that's frightening. And that's why, even if my personal opinion is that it does seem likely Ghosn would have been found guilty of wrongdoing, and his fleeing the country will cement his guilt in the eyes of his detractors, I always approach this matter from the perspective of him being innocent. Because what if he is completely innocent? What if we who live in Japan find ourselves in similar positions despite not having done anything wrong? Could I bear to be in detention for over a year awaiting trial? What would happen to my life in that case? Now obviously this is about Ghosn and not about me, but the hypothetical question and the ethical implications are what make it fascinating. It doesn't really matter if Ghosn is guilty or innocent. It's the question of what's going on in Japan's justice system, where this could happen to someone who is hypothetically innocent. Now Ghosn has fled. Part of me was happy to see him escape what I perceive as an unjust system, and that the answer to those who say if he were innocent he would have nothing to fear and he should have stood trial is that he clearly believed he would get no true justice from this system. And his treatment thus far does support that. Another part of me is disappointed this wasn't seen through to its conclusion, because now we're not going to see the level of scrutiny on this highly questionable judicial process that we would have otherwise. To those who say this is yet another example of one rule for the rich, another for the rest of us, well, yes, that's true. But Japan also had over a year to dispense justice, and I don't even know that they had a timeline for it, even amidst international condemnation of the system on human rights grounds. I suppose the spotlight will shift from him over time, unless he becomes Prime Minister of Lebanon and there are deliciously awkward scenes as he returns to Japan with diplomatic immunity. The less we talk about Ghosn and the less people's knee-jerk reaction is, why are you defending this slimy 0.1%er? The more we can focus on greater issues like whether Japan is really following the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, which it signed in 1979. We can also consider the greater ramifications of this event. Nissan was saved by a true business expert. I don't think it's too much to call Ghosn a savant in his field, even if I might not want to be stuck in a lift with the guy. The arrest came as it seemed more and more likely Ghosn would lead Nissan, and Mitsubishi as well, into a merger with Renault, and of course fire some of the other senior leadership. There were clear political motivations to oust him, but will Nissan continue to flourish without him? Certainly, investor confidence has only gone down since Ghosn's arrest, and in November, the company's quarterly operating profit was down an eye-watering 70%, though the company is at least still profitable. But looking wider, after seeing what happened here, what foreign CEOs are going to risk coming to Japan now? What talented business people would see the appeal of trying to rescue companies here? Not even just at this highest level, but also what percentage of just global talent is going to think Japan is less appealing than it once would have appeared after this news? Nationalists and anti-globalists might rejoice, but if there's any immigrants Japan ought to welcome, it's the exact kind of higher level talent that would be discouraged by this story. Nissan was kept Japanese, and I'm sure it'll be decades before they have a foreign boss again, and maybe that's a small triumph for some. But falling out of step with the march of globalization certainly comes with its risks as well as rewards, and the misadventures of Carlos Ghosn are not likely to do Japan any long-term favours. Alright, that's all I have to say about that. Thanks for listening once again, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!